Hey there everyone, welcome back to Botanic Haven, your go-to channel for everything about gardening, plant care and creating those beautiful green spaces both inside your home and out in your yard. Today I want to talk about something that's been on my mind for a while now, something that I think a lot of us overlook when we're out there tending to our gardens or even just walking through our neighborhoods. We're going to dive into the world of wild food, those incredible edible plants that are literally growing right under our noses, and honestly most of the time we're either ignoring them completely or worse, we're pulling them up and tossing them in the trash like they're just weeds. But here's the thing, these plants are anything but worthless. They're packed with nutrients, they're free, they're sustainable, and they've been feeding people for thousands of years before we ever thought about planting rows of lettuce in our backyard gardens. I remember the first time I really understood what I was missing. It was a few years back, early spring, and I was out in my garden doing the usual cleanup after winter. I was on autopilot, just pulling anything that looked like it didn't belong, when my neighbour Daisy leaned over the fence and asked me what I was doing. I told her I was weeding, getting ready to plant my vegetables for the season. She laughed and pointed at the pile of greens I'd just yanked out and said, "You know, you just threw away about $3 worth of salad greens, right?" I looked at her like she was crazy. Those were weeds, dandelions, chickweed, some clover. She invited me over to her place where she showed me how she used every single one of those plants in her kitchen. That afternoon changed everything for me. Let's start with probably the most famous wild edible that people love to hate, the dandelion. I know you've been fighting these things your whole life, right? They pop up in your lawn, they spread like crazy, and no matter how many times you dig them out, they just keep coming back. But here's what most people don't realize. Every single part of the dandelion is edible and incredibly good for you. The leaves are some of the most nutritious greens you can eat. They're loaded with vitamins A, C, and K, plus they've got more calcium than spinach and more iron than kale. The young leaves, the ones that come up in early spring before the plant flowers, those are much milder and they're perfect in salads. Just mix them with some sweeter greens, add a nice vinaigrette, maybe some nuts or dried fruit, and you've got yourself a gourmet salad that didn't cost you a cent. But it doesn't stop with the leaves. Those bright yellow flowers that everyone tries so hard to get rid of, you can eat those too. They're slightly sweet, and people use them to make dandelion wine, which is this beautiful golden drink that tastes like sunshine if sunshine had a flavour. You can also batter and fry the flowers, toss them in salads for colour, or even make jelly out of them. The roots are probably the most underrated part of the plant. If you dig them up in the fall, you can roast those roots and grind them into a coffee substitute. It's got this deep, earthy, slightly chocolatey flavour that's really nice, and it doesn't have any caffeine. I started doing this last year, and now I actually look forward to dandelion season. If this guide has helped you, write 1 in the comments, and if not, write 0. This way, I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden. Now let's talk about another plant that grows absolutely everywhere, and most people consider it a total nuisance. I'm talking about purslane. This little succulent plant with the thick, juicy leaves and the tiny yellow flowers shows up in gardens, in cracks, in sidewalks, basically anywhere there's a little bit of dirt and some sunshine. Then I learned that purslane is one of the best sources of omega-3 fatty acids in the plant world. We're talking about the same healthy fats that are in fish and flax seeds. It's also got tons of vitamin A and C, plus antioxidants and minerals. And the taste? It's actually really pleasant. It's slightly lemony, a little bit tangy, with a nice crisp texture. You can eat it raw in salads, you can saute it like spinach, you can pickle it, or you can add it to soups and stews. My friend Oliver started putting purslane in his morning smoothies after he learned about the omega-3s, and he swears it's made a difference in his joint pain. The thing about purslane is that once you start recognizing it, you see it everywhere. I was walking through a parking lot the other day, and there it was, growing up through a crack in the asphalt, just thriving in this completely inhospitable environment. That's how tough this plant is, and we've been treating it like garbage when we should be celebrating it as the nutritional powerhouse that it is. Then there's chickweed, which is another one of those plants that gardeners spend so much time and energy trying to eliminate. It's this delicate little plant with small oval leaves and tiny white star-shaped flowers, and it forms these dense mats that can cover large areas of your garden pretty quickly. But chickweed is actually a really lovely salad green. It's mild, slightly grassy tasting, and the texture is tender. It's got vitamin C, beta-carotene, and a bunch of minerals. Plus, it's been used in traditional medicine for centuries as a remedy for skin irritations and inflammation. You can make a poultice out of it for bug bites, rashes, or minor burns. In the kitchen, chickweed is incredibly versatile. Use it like you'd use lettuce or spinach, throw it in sandwiches, blend it into pesto, add it to omelets, or just munch on it straight from the garden. What's fascinating to me is that all of these plants, the dandelions, the purslane, the chickweed, they're actually way more nutritious than a lot of the vegetables we buy at the store. Think about it. Modern agriculture has bred plants for size, uniformity, shelf life, and mild flavor. But in doing that, we've actually bred out a lot of the nutrients and the interesting flavors that made those plants valuable in the first place. Wild plants haven't been through that process. They've evolved to survive in tough conditions, which means they've developed high concentrations of vitamins, minerals, and protective compounds. When we eat these plants, we get all of those benefits. It's like getting a nutritional upgrade for free. Let me tell you about lamb's quarters, which is also called wild spinach, and for good reason. This plant looks a lot like a young spinach plant, or maybe chard, with these diamond-shaped leaves that have a slightly dusty or powdery coating on them. The leaves are fantastic cooked or raw. They taste like a cross between spinach and chard, maybe a little bit earthier, and they're packed with protein, which is unusual for a leafy green. They've also got calcium, iron, vitamin A, vitamin C, and a bunch of B vitamins. You can use lamb's quarters anywhere you'd use spinach. Sauté it with garlic and olive oil, add it to pasta dishes, throw it in curries or stir-fries, or use it in quiches and frittatas. I started growing lamb's quarters on purpose a couple of years ago, which sounds weird when you think about the fact that most people are trying to get rid of it. But once I understood how nutritious and productive it was, I figured why not let it grow in a corner of the garden where I don't have anything else planted. It self-seeds like crazy, so I basically never have to plant it again. My neighbor Ivy thought I was absolutely nuts when she saw me out there tending to what she considered weeds, but after I brought her a bag of the cooked greens to try, she changed her tune. Now she's got her own patch growing in her garden. Wood sorrel is another wild edible that I want to mention because it's so common and so overlooked. It's this little plant with heart-shaped leaves that grow in groups of 3, kind of like a shamrock, and it has small yellow or white or pink flowers. The leaves have this amazing tangy lemony flavor because they contain oxalic acid. You don't want to eat huge quantities of wood sorrel, but in moderation, it's a wonderful addition to salads, and kids especially love it because of that sour taste. It's like nature's sour candy. You can also use it as a garnish, add it to lemonade for extra zing, or make a really unique pesto with it. Plantain is one of those plants that's so common you probably walk past it every single day without giving it a second thought. I'm not talking about the tropical fruit, I'm talking about the weed with the oval leaves and the long, thin seed spikes. The young leaves are the best for eating. They have a mild, slightly mushroomy flavor, and they're good in salads if you chop them up fine, or you can cook them like any other green. But plantain is probably more famous for its medicinal uses. The leaves are amazing for insect bites, stings, and minor wounds. If you get stung by a bee or a wasp, you can chew up a plantain leaf, or just crush it between your fingers, and apply it directly to the sting. The enzymes in the leaf help draw out toxins and reduce swelling and pain. Speaking of stings, let's talk about stinging nettle for a minute. Those little hairs on the leaves and stems cause that immediate burning sensation, but once you cook nettles or dry them, those stinging hairs are completely neutralized, and what you're left with is one of the most nutritious greens on the planet. Nettles are insanely high in iron, calcium, magnesium, and vitamins A and C. They're fantastic in soups, they make a beautiful pesto, you can steam them like spinach, or you can dry them and use them to make tea. The key is harvesting them safely. Always wear gloves and long sleeves, and use scissors to cut the tops of the plants before they flower. Clover is another plant that we see constantly but rarely think about as food. The flowers are the best part. They're sweet and mild, and you can eat them raw in salads, steep them in hot water to make tea, or even dry them and grind them into a flour. Clover is also really good for the soil because it's a nitrogen fixer, which means it takes nitrogen from the air and converts it into a form that plants can use. So if you've got clover growing in your garden, don't pull it all out. Let it grow until it's time to plant, then chop it down and turn it into the soil as green manure. Garlic mustard is an interesting one because it's actually considered an invasive species in a lot of places, which means that eating it is both beneficial for your health and good for the environment. This plant has heart-shaped leaves with scalloped edges, and when you crush them, they smell exactly like garlic. The whole plant is edible. The leaves have a flavour that's like a cross between mustard and garlic. Perfect for pesto, or you can sauté them with other greens. The roots taste like horseradish, and the seeds can be used like mustard seeds. Because garlic mustard is so aggressive, foraging it is actually helping to control its spread. A friend of mine named Lucas started organising garlic mustard foraging parties in his community as a way to deal with the invasion problem in the local parks. He'd invite people to come out with bags and scissors, and they'd spend a few hours harvesting, then everyone would go back to his place and cook up a huge meal using everything they collected. It became this really fun social event where people learned about foraging and invasive species management while also getting to eat delicious food. Violets are another wild edible that most people have in their yards without even realizing it. Both the leaves and the flowers are edible, and they're absolutely packed with vitamin C. In fact, violet leaves have more vitamin C than oranges. The flowers are beautiful in salads, and you can also candy them to use as decorations on cakes and desserts. The leaves are best when they're young, and they're great for thickening soups and stews because they have a bit of a slippery texture when you cook them, similar to okra. The safety aspect of foraging is something we need to talk about because it's important. You should never eat a wild plant unless you are 100% certain of what it is. Some plants have toxic lookalikes. Start with plants that are easy to identify and hard to confuse with anything else. Dandelions, plantain, clover, those are good beginner plants. Get a good field guide, preferably one that's specific to edible plants in your region, and spend time learning to identify plants in different stages of growth. Another important consideration is where you're harvesting. Don't forage along roadsides where plants might be contaminated with exhaust fumes and heavy metals. Don't harvest from areas that might have been sprayed with pesticides. Your own yard is the safest place to forage because you know exactly what's been applied to it. Wash everything thoroughly before you eat it, just like you would with store-bought produce, and start slowly when you're trying a new wild edible for the first time. Try just a small amount first and wait to see how your body responds. The environmental benefits of foraging are worth thinking about too. When you harvest wild edibles from your yard or your neighborhood, you're eating food that didn't require any fossil fuels to grow, harvest, process, package, or transport. It didn't require irrigation, fertilizer, or pesticides. It just grew on its own with nothing but sunlight, rain, and soil. That's about as sustainable as food can get. You're also connecting with the seasons in a really tangible way. Spring brings tender greens and flowers, summer brings fruits and seeds, fall brings roots and nuts. I've noticed that foraging has changed the way I look at landscapes. I used to see a lawn or a field as just scenery, but now I see it as potential food source. I notice which plants grow well together, which ones prefer shade or sun. There's something deeply satisfying about going outside, finding a plant, identifying it correctly, harvesting it carefully, and turning it into food. It engages all your senses, and it reminds you that you're part of nature, not separate from it. If you're interested in getting started with foraging, my advice is to begin right in your own yard. Spend time observing what's already growing there. Take pictures of the plants you don't recognize and use a plant identification app or a field guide to figure out what they are. Join online foraging groups or local foraging walks if there are any in your area. Once you've learned a few basic plants and you're comfortable with identifying them, branch out to parks and natural areas near you. Keep a journal of what you find and when you find it. One of the things I love most about foraging is that it's accessible to almost everyone. You don't need a lot of land, you don't need fancy equipment, you don't need to spend money on seeds or soil amendments. You just need curiosity, patience, and a willingness to learn. Kids especially love foraging because it turns a walk into a treasure hunt. They love finding things, identifying them, and knowing that they discovered something edible that most people walk right past. There's also a historical dimension to foraging that I find really compelling. When you're eating dandelion greens or making tea from clover flowers, you're participating in traditions that go back thousands of years. You're eating the same foods that your ancestors ate. By learning to forage, we're reclaiming some of that heritage and keeping those traditions alive. We're also pushing back against the industrialization of our food system and taking back a little bit of autonomy. The nutritional density of wild foods compared to cultivated vegetables is honestly pretty shocking. Studies have shown that many wild edibles have significantly higher levels of vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants than their domesticated counterparts. Dandelion greens have 7 times more antioxidants than spinach. Purslane has more omega-3 fatty acids than some fish oils. Lamb's quarters has more protein and calcium than cabbage. And yet we spend billions of dollars every year growing and buying vegetables that are nutritionally inferior to the plants we're actively trying to eliminate from our yards. The flavor profiles of wild edibles are also much more complex and interesting than most cultivated vegetables. That bitterness in dandelion greens, that lemony tang in wood sorrel, that garlicky punch in garlic mustard, those are flavors you just can't get from anything at the grocery store. Once you start incorporating wild edibles into your meals, you'll find that they add depth and complexity that makes everything more interesting. Your salads become more varied, your sautéed greens have more character, your pestos have unique flavors that people can't quite identify, but they know they love. I want to touch on the abundance mindset that foraging encourages. When you're buying food at the store, there's always a cost associated with it. But when you're foraging, the only cost is your time and effort. The food itself is free. That shift in mindset from scarcity to abundance is really powerful. You stop thinking, can I afford this? And start thinking, how much of this do I want to harvest? And because wild plants are often incredibly productive, you can harvest quite a lot without making any noticeable impact on the plant population. That brings up another important point, which is being a responsible forager. Never harvest so much of any plant that you're depleting the population or preventing it from reproducing. Leave plenty behind for the bees, butterflies, birds, and other creatures that depend on these plants for food. Be mindful of rare or endangered plants and don't harvest those at all. Stick to common, abundant species. Think of yourself as part of the ecosystem, not as someone extracting resources from it. Let me mention a few more wild edibles worth knowing about. Wild strawberries produce fruit that's so much more flavorful than store-bought varieties. They're tiny, but the flavor is concentrated and intense. Wild blackberries and raspberries are also common in many areas, growing along fence lines and forest edges. Rose hips, which are the fruit of the rose plant, are packed with vitamin C, and they make a lovely tea. Pine needles also make a tea that's high in vitamin C and has a lovely citrusy flavor. Cattails are amazing because almost every part of the plant is edible at different times of year. The list goes on and on. There are hundreds of edible wild plants in most regions, and once you start paying attention, you'll be amazed at how much food is growing wild all around you. The knowledge is out there. The plants are out there. All you have to do is learn how to recognize them and how to use them safely. And the best part is, once you learn this stuff, it stays with you forever. I hope this has inspired you to look at the plants around you with fresh eyes and to consider giving wild foraging a try. Start small, be safe, learn thoroughly before you harvest, and enjoy the process of discovering this incredible hidden world of food that's been right under your nose this whole time. If you have questions, or if you want to share your own foraging experiences, drop them in the comments. And if you've enjoyed this guide, please hit that like button and subscribe to Botanic Haven so you don't miss future content about gardening, plants, and all the wonderful ways we can connect with the natural world. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy foraging, everyone!